What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up a brand new wish list for the A2 expansion pack coming out at the end of January. That's right, we're cooking up a wish list for the new A2 expansion set coming out in Pokemon Pocket at the end of January. I did this last time before Mythical Island came out, and I did a huge wish list that was super duper long and super duper fun to do, so I felt like I wanted to do another one. I think I'm going to split this one amongst a couple of videos, but first off, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with the EX Pokemon. So what I did is I went online, I went to Pokemon Card Maker, and I made all my own cards. I took all the art from images online, and I made up all my own HPs, retreat cost, attacks, the attack damage, the abilities, everything. And so with that being said, let's get in to the first Pokemon. So the first card we're going to talk about is Meganium EX, the Johto version of Venusaur, the grass type starter. And of course, I chose all Johto Pokemon because it is kind of a consensus that we all kind of believe the next set will be Johto, considering the first set was Kanto. So they're going from Gen 1 to Gen 2, or at least we believe they are. So all the EX Pokemon that I have made are from Johto. So let's get into it. Meganium EX, a stage 2 grass type with 170 HP. For the 170 HP, I found it kind of tough to for all the Pokemon I made. I found the toughest part was the HP part. I didn't really always know what to do, but I decided to go with 170 HP for all of the starters, and so you'll see the other two starters later on in the video. As for the retreat cost, I gave it 3 retreat costs because it is a pretty strong Pokemon. Once we get into the ability and the attack, I was okay with giving it 170 and a 3 retreat cost to kind of try and balance it out a little bit. Of course, weak to fire. So let's start with the ability. The ability says, so it's one that you would click on. It's called Nature Spring. Heal 50 damage from one of your grass type Pokemon. So basically in every single turn. Erica, now this might be honestly broken if it was real. I'm not so sure because it is a stage 2, so you would have to get into it. It would probably still be played in decks with Erica. I don't know if the Ericas would just be completely removed, but what made me think of it is there are often cards that mimic the effects of the trainer cards we have in the game. And so I felt like it was pretty cool to do. I feel like grass, it is kind of strong right now, but it's still not the strongest deck. And a lot of cards you would want to play with this would be really hard to play with it anyways, such as Venusaur. If you wanted to play this in a Venusaur deck, you would have to play 2 stage 2s, and that's already kind of really hard to do. But what really made me think of this ability was to kind of pair it with something like Executor, just make it even more tankier than it kind of already is. So you can just try to specifically make an Executor deck. I don't feel like there's any real specific Executor decks in the game right now. It's either a Venusaur deck, which no one really plays anymore, or a Celebi Superior deck. And why am I lagging everywhere? Like, what is going on? Is this actually in the video? I don't know. Moving on. Either a Celebi deck or a Venusaur deck. And so I kind of felt like if you did it a straight up Executor deck, it would work out very well. And then as we get into the attack, it's called Solar Beam for 5 grass energy, which is a ton of energies, but it's also a very strong attack. And for those of you who don't know what Solar Beam does in the video games, basically it's a 2-turn attack. It's the first turn, they have to absorb sunlight, and then the second turn, it does a ton of damage. So in this case, it kind of works the same. It says during your next turn, if you use this attack, if you use this attack on the defending Pokemon, the Pokemon is knocked out. So it straight up just knocks it out. It doesn't do any damage at all. So basically what you would have to do is get 5 energies on this guy, attack in once, doesn't do any damage, and then attack in again the same turn, the next turn with the same attack, and you just straight up knock them out. Now you would think this is super duper strong, but if you really think of it, first of all, 5 energies is a lot of energy. It's a stage 2 Pokemon. It doesn't have the highest of HP, so it still could be pretty easily knocked out. But another thing is it's basically a 2-turn attack. So you're always 2-shotting any Pokemon that you attack. Unlike something like a Charizard where it's always 1-shotting for the same energy. Same thing with Gyarados, because you match them with Druddigon and Greninja, you're most likely always 1-shotting every Pokemon. This is still a 2-shot Pokemon, and as it says in the effect for the attack, it says defending Pokemon. So that means it has to be the exact same Pokemon that you're attacking into, which means either if your opponent can still retreat, which means this is no longer online, or the Pokemon can evolve, which means that Pokemon is no longer online, or this effect is no longer online to knock out the Pokemon, which means a lot of the time this attack for 5 energy might not be doing any damage at all. And then when you think of it, when you pair it with something like a superior, it's not like it's 4 energy where you only have to put on 2. You would still have to put on 3 energy manually in order to attack, even if you have a superior on. But again, that's another stage 2 Pokemon. So I kind of felt that these combinations of all the HP, retreat, attack, ability, and all the costs for this card felt kind of balanced. And it is the only grass type Pokemon that I put on as an EX from the Johto set. So I felt like it was balanced. But anyways, with that being said, let's get in to the water type Pokemon. So the next card we want to get into is the Suicune EX, the water type legendary, and we gave it 140 HP to kind of mimic the Articuno and the Lapras that we currently have in the game as EX Pokemon. As well, what else we wanted to do is to kind of mimic it, is give it a 3 energy attack for 80 damage, just like the other ones. But what we did is we changed its retreat cost. So Lapras has a 3 retreat cost and Articuno has a 2. So Suicune we gave a 1 retreat cost, because Articuno, it has a higher retreat cost but it has more damage, and Lapras has an even higher retreat cost than both of them, but also gets to heal itself. This card is basically just doing 80 damage, but it does have an effect, and it is specifically 3 water energy, so no colorless at all. And basically what it reads is once it attacks and does 80 damage, it automatically says the opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. So confusion is supposed to be coming to the game at some point. I am assuming it's going to come in the next set, because they mentioned that confusion, burn, and item cards will be coming to the game. And so I felt like it was important to give some of the cards here attacks that create confusion on the opponent's active Pokemon. And so that's what I did. And with that being said, let's get in to the Feraligatr, who also pairs very well with this card. So this is the Feraligatr EX. It's a stage 2 and has 170 HP, just like the Meganium, except it has a 1 retreat cost. And the reason I did this is so that it can pair not only with something like Suicune, but something like the Vaporeon, the new Vaporeon that we got in Mythical Island. I feel like is very underutilized and has not found its place in the game. So because Suicune takes 3 energy and this card would take 4, I felt like it would be a very good pairing to pair with Vaporeon, so that you can retreat and take all those energies that you had on your Suicune and put it onto your Feraligatr. And his move for 4 water energy does 80 damage plus 20 more if the opponent's Pokemon is confused. So of course it pairs super well with Suicune. So basically what you would be doing is, even if it's not confused and you hit in with Suicune and it took a ton of damage, you can retreat it, bring out your Feraligatr, put all the energy on it, and then do another 80. That's 160 over 2 turns. Or what you can do is you would attack with your Suicune, retreat, that would be 80 damage, bring in Feraligatr. If the Pokemon is still confused, then it would do 100, which would be 180 damage, basically creating this kind of combo where you're always 2-shotting with this deck in some way, shape, or form. So I wanted to, again, for the water type Pokemon, do the ability of causing confusion on your opponent's active Pokemon and include it in both of their attacks. So that's what I did. But with that being said, let's move on to the fire type Pokemon. So this is the first fire type Pokemon, and it's Anti-EX, and it has 130 HP. Because what we did with Suicune, we tried to mimic the Articuno and the Lapras. What we tried to do here is do the opposite from Moltres, which is the kind of that big basic EX Pokemon that's for fire type currently in the game is 140. I wanted to give Anti-EX 130, and you'll see why, because later when we get in to Raikou, which is the electric legendary, it has 140, which is mimics the opposite of the fires, which would be Moltres at 140, Entei at 130, and then Zapdos at 130, and Raikou at 140. So we gave 130 to Anti-EX, but we also gave it a 2 retreat cost because the Moltres already has 2. We wanted to give Entei 2 retreat cost as well. So if it did kind of go in those same kind of shells or decks, it would still be played in a similar style with cards like Leaf. But anyways, let's get into the attack. It only has 1, and for 1 fire energy, Flame Wheel is doing 10 damage. But what it says discard 1 energy. Your opponent's active Pokemon is burned. So you every time you want to attack with this, you're only doing 10 damage, but because it's burned, it does a minimum of 20 extra damage, which is 30 damage for 1 energy on an EX Pokemon with 130 is not bad. Plus, if burn stays, because burn, unlike poison, does get a flip and a checkup, and so therefore it could stop being burned, but I believe it has to flip 2 coins. And basically, if it stayed to the end of your turn and the end of their turn, it would be 50 damage for 1 energy. So I felt like that's pretty decent. No Pokemon right now that's a basic does 50 damage. The only one that does is Primeape, which is a stage 1. So it was, if the full effect goes through, then it would actually be doing more damage than the basic one we currently have right now, which is something like a Farfetch. Now, of course, you can have other cards that do more damage for 1 energy, things like Executor and things like Kangaskhan with the Dizzy Punch, but I felt like this was pretty balanced. But honestly, 20 damage on this, plus the burn twice at 60, could be kind of balanced considering that you would have to flip coins to get the burn off. But again, the effect is discard 1 energy, so you're not always having that free roll, and it also, because it pairs with another fire Pokemon that we have from Johto that I made as an EX, and we'll get into that. But first, before we do, let's get into Typhlosion. So this is the Typhlosion. It is the fire starter from Johto. It's a stage 2 EX Pokemon with 170 HP, the same as for Alligator and Meganium, except we gave it a 2 retreat cost. For Alligator, we gave it a 1 retreat, and Meganium, we gave it a 3. So Typhlosion, we decided to give it a 2 retreat cost to kind of differentiate the basic stats on the cards. So its first attack is for 1 fire energy. It's called Ember. It does 10 damage. Flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is burned. So very similar to the Entei, except you have to flip a coin, whereas Entei, it automatically burns it. In this case, because it has to flip a coin, it has a little bit less of a chance of actually burning your opponent's Pokemon, whereas Entei, it automatically does it, but it discards the energy. In this case, it does not. But then it has a second attack for 4 fire energy, Eruption, 100 damage plus. So if your opponent's active Pokemon is burned, do 30 more damage. So basically, if it's burned, it would actually be, so because it was burned, it would have been burned either by Ember or by Flame Wheel. So therefore, that's 10 damage plus 2 turns of burn. That would be 50 plus the 100 plus the extra 30 from Eruption. That would be a total of 180 damage. So basically, again, it's one of those attacks that combined with a previous attack from any of the Pokemon that burns the opponent's active. It would be a 2-turn knockout on almost any Pokemon in the game. In fact, it would be on any Pokemon in the game because everyone has at least 100, at most 180 or less, and the only one that has 190 is Venusaur, but because it's weak to fire, it would get knocked out. Now, with Eruption, this can be paired with something like a Moltres, of course, but the way I built it is to potentially be built with something like Ho-Oh. So with that being said, let's get into Ho-Oh. So this is Ho-Oh. It's the basic EX fire type Pokemon with 130 HP. It also has a 1 retreat cost and the ability Sunny Day, which reads, when you play this Pokemon onto your bench, attach a fire energy from your discard pile onto one of your fire type Pokemon. So if for those who don't know, there actually is a discard option in your discard pile for energy specific. So obviously at some point that's going to come into the game as a part of the game. Otherwise they wouldn't have it. So because of that, this card pairs very well with the Entei and the Typhlosion that we just talked about. Because Entei, his 1 energy attack, every time he attacks, it discards an energy to the discard pile. And Typhlosion, because it has a 4 energy requirement and it's a stage 2, you have a lot of time to get some of those energy into your discard pile. And then at the end, when you're ready to attack or bring in your Typhlosion with something like 1 energy already attached to it, which means it needs 3 more now. So the turn you bring it in, now you could put down 2 Ho-Oh potentially in the same turn to put energy on those that Typhlosion plus the 1 manual. It would now be up to 4. So this would work very well all together, and it's kind of a cool dynamic because it only gets the effect when you play it down onto your bench from your hand. There would be times in the game where you have to hold the Ho-Oh EX, and not just that, because the Ho-Oh might be the only basic Pokemon in your start in hand at the beginning of the game. It's kind of like you would never get that effect at all because you would never play it onto your bench, and even if it did, there would be no energy in your energy discard pile. Now this card might very well kind of break the game in the sense of being played alongside with something like Moltres and other cards that discard fire type energy, such as Charizard, because Charizard usually, if you want to sweep the game, what you would want to do is get 6 energy on it and then attack 2 turns in a row, considering it discards 2 energy every single time it attacks for 200 damage. So basically, if Ho-Oh was in the game, you can ramp it up, your Charizard up with Moltres, and then your Charizard would get 5 energy on it, attack, discard 2, but then you would manually attach 1, that would be 4, that wouldn't be enough, but then you would play your Ho-Oh onto your bench and then attach that energy back on to Charizard. So it might break the game, but honestly, Charizard, it's still very strong, but I wouldn't even really consider it like the top 5 decks. It still does very well. It's super underplayed compared to some of the other decks and doesn't win as often. And as I said, I don't even think it's in the top 5. I think those top 5 is still reserved for things like Pikachu, Gyarados, Mewtwo, Celebi, and maybe even an Aerodactyl variant. So with that being said, let's get into the electric type Pokemon. So this is Raikou, the basic electric type EX Pokemon, the legendary beast, and it has 140 HP. So this also has a 1 retreat cost, and it has 2 attacks. Its attacks being Thunder Shock and Thunder Bolt, and the first one is for 2 energy and it does 20 damage. It says flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. So very similar to Dedenne, and I think it's Pinchirum is the other guy's name. I completely forget. Nobody's played it in a while, but Pinchirum was 2 energy as well, and it did 30 damage. Dedenne is 1, and it does 10. So I felt like 2 energy for a early game attack with 20 damage felt very balanced for this EX Pokemon with the potential to paralyze. So this might replace Dedenne in decks like Pikachu EX, or it might just be played in its own deck, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But its second attack is for 3 electric energy, 80 damage. It's the Thunderbolt attack. If your opponent's active Pokemon is paralyzed, this does 20 more damage. So basically across 2 turns of attack, it would do a total of 120 damage. This would knock out things like a Pikachu EX, because if it's paralyzed, it wouldn't be able to retreat and you would knock it out. I felt like this was kind of balanced because 80 damage, potentially 100 for 3 instead of 90 from a Pikachu, where you have to have your bench full. This can maybe even be its own deck. It would be more energy, but you can start attacking as long as it has 2 energy on it, paralyze, and then continue the attack, doing 120 over 2 turns. So let's get into the next electric type Pokemon, the Ampharos EX. So this is Ampharos EX, a stage 2 electric EX Pokemon with 160 HP, and it also has a 1 retreat cost. So I gave it 160 because I didn't really want to continue to try to give Pokemon that are higher stages these really high HPs, or else they'd all really feel the same. I wanted to give it a bit of a lower, especially since it has a pretty cool ability and a decent attack and a very cheap retreat cost. So I kind of felt like I needed to try to continue the whole balancing thing, and that's kind of hard to do. I'm not a game creator, I'm not a game dev. I don't create Pokemon cards. I just do it for fun as a content creator. But its ability is what's really cool. It's Thunder Wave. So Raikou had Thunder Shock, Thunderbolt. This card has an ability called Thunder Wave and has an attack called Thunder, which are all attacks from the video games for electric type Pokemon. So the Thunder Wave ability reads: when you play this Pokemon onto your bench to evolve it, your opponent's active Pokemon becomes paralyzed. So no coin flips, no nothing, automatically paralyzed, which is super duper strong. To automatically paralyze your opponent's Pokemon is super strong because they only do their checkup at the end of their turn, which means they are automatically going to be poisoned for at least 1 turn. This pairs very, very well with something like your Raikou, who could potentially be doing 100 damage, because if you evolve your Ampharos on the turn you're attacking with your Raikou, it automatically gets that extra 20 damage. So the 80 plus 20 would be 100 damage, which means it's paralyzed, you're doing 100 damage, and then on the following turn, if it doesn't become unparalyzed through the checkup, you do another 100 damage with your Raikou, which means you're automatically two-shotting any Pokemon in the game, which is a super strong combo between these 2 cards. And then when you get into its attack for 3 lightning energy, Thunder does 120 damage. If your opponent's active Pokemon isn't paralyzed, this attack does nothing. So it's kind of a balance thing that I chose to do for this card, because automatically poisoning your opponent's Pokemon is super strong in Pokemon TCG. In fact, there's very few cards in the game that ever existed in the paper TCG that automatically paralyze your opponent's Pokemon, because it's super duper strong effect. So by paralyzing them automatically, you get to do 120, and that's super strong. That'll knock out already something like a Pikachu. If you combined it with the Giovanni, you're knocking out a ton of Pokemon. All the legendary birds, because they're weak to electric, basically you're knocking out a ton of stuff for free, because again, it's just they're automatically paralyzed and you get to attack. And then anything with higher HP, again, if it's paralyzed, you get at least 120 in. But again, if they aren't paralyzed, then you can attack them again, which means even if you knock out something on the next turn, it's going to be almost impossible to paralyze them in the same turn unless you get another Ampharos online the next turn, which would be really hard to do. So I do feel like it's kind of balanced, but I guess you guys let me know in the comments below whether you think these cards are balanced or not. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into my favorite portion. It's the steel types. Let's get into the steel types. So let's get into the steel types, and we have 3 of them, and I'm going to tell you all of them right now. It's Skarmory, Scizor, and Steelix EX, all EX Pokemon. The steel types need something major to change them in this game to make them super duper good. And I decided to go with all 3 of the steel types that I know of in Johto, the Skarmory, Scizor, and Steelix, which is really cool because 2 of them, the Scizor and the Onix, already evolve from Pokemon in Genetic Apex, the Scyther for Scizor and the Onix for Steelix. But let's start with Skarmory. It's not going to be a very long run. I'll get through this one quick so we can get into the other ones. A basic EX Pokemon with 120 HP, very similar to Pikachu, with 1 retreat cost, with 1 energy requirement for the Steel Wing attack, doing 30 damage. So that's already pretty good right away. 1 energy for 30 damage. I find is kind of balanced right there because it's an EX, so it's doing so similar to something like a Farfetch. Farfetch was 60, so it's half its HP but does more damage. This is double its HP, that does less damage, but it does have a very strong effect of the attack, which is add a random supporter card from your deck to your hand. So that's random, but it's very specific for the reason of Steelix, and we'll get into that in a minute. But let's get into Scizor. This is the Scizor. It's the Stage 1 EX that evolves from Scyther. It has 130 HP and a 1 retreat cost, and I gave both Skarmory and Scizor very cheap retreat costs because the Steelix we're going to get into has a very high retreat cost and a very strong attack, and the whole deck really revolves around Steelix really being your main guy. So as you can see, his attack is both a grass and a steel type energy requirement. It's X Scissor for 70 damage. Now this mimics Bisharp's damage output at 70. However, it's an EX with 130 and requires 2 different types of energy, so it is kind of low. But if you can get 2 attacks off of this, you can knock out a ton of Pokemon. And really, the idea of this is it says, with the effect of the attack, attach 1 energy from this Pokemon to 1 of your benched Pokemon. So because this deck has to play steel type energy because it's a steel type deck, it might also require you to play grass because Scyther is a grass type Pokemon. So that's why I gave it both a grass and a metal type requirement for its attack. And then the Onix for Steelix is a fighting type that plays fighting type energy. So what I wanted to do was be able to have an attack that you can attack with both your Scyther and your Scizor, but then also take those extra energies that you have to play in the deck and put them on to potentially your Onix. And I actually wrote to 1 of your bench Pokemon, but I should have wrote steel type Pokemon, and it could be any of the energy, not just the steel type. So that was a mistake, but again, it's really meant to be played with Steelix and attach potentially to those Steelix, and obviously because it would be a steel type that you have to attach to, you can also potentially play this with something like a Melmetal. But with that being said, let's get into the Steelix. So this is the Steelix. It's the Stage 1 Steel type Pokemon that has 190 damage. I gave so much extra love to the Steelix. It's my favorite Pokemon, one of them of all time. I always thought Onix was the coolest thing, and then when I found out that he evolved when I was a kid into Steelix, I was super duper excited, and I'm super duper excited for the actual Steelix that might come out in the next set, but this is my idea of what it would look like. So again, 190 HP. For those of you that don't know, Steelix is a super tanky Pokemon in the game. I think it has like one of the highest defense and highest HPs in the game, or as highest defense and special defense, something like that. It has 2 stats in the game that like are way above all, and it's super defensive stats. So what we did is we gave it a ton of HP. HP. But we also made it super because it's a heavy Pokemon, and usually heavy Pokemon get really high retreat cost, and light or fast Pokemon that have a ton of crazy speed stats in the video games get really low retreat costs in the actual TCG games. But let's get in, and of course it's weak to fire. Steel types are weak to fire, but let's get into its attack. So for 2 steel and 2 colorless, it does 190 damage. However, it says this Pokemon cannot attack on your next turn. So you can one-shot any Pokemon in the game, but you can only do it once, and then you can't do it the next turn. You have to wait an entire turn in order to use this attack again. And because it requires 4 energy, there's a very cool way you can ramp this guy up. So for 1, you can play the steel type energy on to the Onix, on the Onix if you want. And then what you can do is you can ramp with Brock. And how do we do that? How do we make it viable? Well, the Skarmory's attack, if you remember, I gave it an attack for 1 energy that searches your deck for a random. It is random because you do have to make it balanced. I wouldn't just say Brock. It would have nothing to do with Brock. Skarmory has nothing to do with Brock at all in the game or the anime. So it's a random supporter, but it increases your chances of still getting that Brock into your hand in the early game, so that on the next turn you can play the Brock on your Onix. So now it has a steel type and a fighting type, which requires covers one of the colorless, and then your Scizor can use its leaf and its or its steel type that's currently on the Scizor to ramp the energy from Scizor onto your Steelix. So basically, as you would build up to your Steelix, you could ramp with your Brock, manually attach, ramp with Scizor, and then manually attach. So technically you can do it on, I think it was 2 turns, if that makes sense, right? So you can ramp into your Steelix pretty quickly and then bring it into the game and finish the game up, because again, you only need 3 prizes in this game. So even though you can attack on the following turn, which might be a huge drawback of the card, if you do it when you only need 2 prizes left and you attack an EX Pokemon, you just win the game anyway. So I'm not sure if this is balanced. It feels balanced to me, but again, I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments below. And with that being said, we got 2 more Pokemon, so let's get into them. It's Lugia and Tyranitar. So let's get into the Lugia. So this is Lugia. It's the basic colorless Pokemon. It's an EX and has 150 damage, very similar to something like a Mewtwo EX. As it is a legendary, I did want to give it that 150 HP, just like Mewtwo. It does have a 2 retreat cost, just like Mewtwo as well, but it has the ability Echoed Voice, which reads your colorless Pokemon get plus 20 attack. And yes, this ability could stack. So if you have 2 Lugia EX on your bench, your colorless Pokemon do 40 more damage total. So first, let's just talk about the Lugia. If you do its Aeroblast attack for 1 fire, 1 water, and 1 colorless, it does 100. With this being stacked, that's 140 damage. With something like a Giovanni, this would do 150, basically knocking out Mewtwo EX and anything else with lower HP. By the way, this is also weak to electric, just like all the legendary birds in the game. I even gave all the ones in this, the Ho-Oh as well, weak to electric because they're flying types. But back to Aeroblast, 100 plus 20 from itself, plus 20 from the other Lugia EX would be 140. Again, with the Giovanni, would not go Mewtwo EX or anything lower. And then when you think about it, look at its energy requirement, 1 fire, 1 water. Well, what else would you play this with? Something like a Druddigon. That would be pretty cool, because if you get that extra damage from Druddigon, now you're potentially doing up to something like 160. With the Giovanni, you're also doing something like 170. You can also pair it in Giovanni decks, or sorry, Greninja decks, the Greninja Druddigon builds, and possibly get all the way up to 180, maybe even replacing the Gyarados decks. And because it's 2 energy requirements, it's only 3 energy requirements, but 2 different energies, it would be maybe less consistent, and it has a lower base or lower floor, so it kind of feels balanced to me. But what's also really super duper cool in its effect and its ability is your colorless Pokemon have 20 more attack. Well, who else does this work with? Tauros, the new Tauros from Mythical Island, that does 120 to any EX Pokemon. So that only right now knocks out something like a Pikachu. And then, of course, he's also being played and replacing Gyarados in Druddigon Greninja builds. But now what you would be doing is you would be able to do 160 if this stacked twice with just your Tauros. Combined it with the Druddigon, that's 180. That is crazy. The decks that could come out just from this card would be super duper strong. Lugia would be the new Gyarados, or Tauros would be the new Gyarados. So there's so many cool builds that you can make going forward with this, and it would be very strong, but still very inconsistent. And again, another reason I gave it 2 retreat is because Druddigon also has 2 retreat, and so does Tauros. So those decks would still have to play something like a Leaf. And if you're playing a Leaf to get something out to bring in your big attacker, it kind of stops these decks from being able to play things like Giovanni. So those breakpoints sometimes might not be there. Again, I felt like I balanced this pretty well. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And let's get into our last card, the Tyranitar EX. So this is the Tyranitar EX, and it's a stage 2 dark type Pokemon with 180 damage and has a 4 retreat cost, and it has an ability called Hidden Power and an attack called Ancient Power. So I made this card because I felt like, for one, we already don't have any EX Pokemon that are dark yet. So, of course, Tyranitar needs to be an EX, especially if something like an Umbreon won't be an EX, which I don't think it will be. All the other evolutions that we currently have in the game are no EX variants of it. So I don't think the future ones that are coming in will have EX variants either. So I made this one an EX, and when I first started building it, I felt like giving it like a really strong attack to kind of make it stronger. But I also started thinking about, like, what are some of the other issues Dark has? And it's because all the decks that Dark has are either just not that great yet, or have been okay but never really there. They've been kind of like these anti-meta single price decks. But one of the things that needs help the most out of the Dark type is the Nidoking, Nidoqueen deck. And so let's get in to this card's abilities and its attack. So its first ability is Hidden Power. It's when you play this Pokemon down to evolve it from your hand, heal all damage from this Pokemon. So basically, all your pre-evolutions for any damage that they would have taken, once you evolve your Tyranitar EX, you heal all the damage from it. So it kind of plays along with the whole denying your opponent prize cards thing, like the Weezing Koga package does. However, because it has 180 HP, what you're doing is you're allowing yourself to do some serious major tanking. And why are you doing that? Because what you want to do is you want to be able to tank with this card as much as you can, get 2 energy on it to attack with Ancient Power. And what does this do? It says put a stage 2 dark type Pokemon directly down onto your bench without evolving it. So yes, as I mentioned, Nidoking, Nidoqueen need a ton of help, and this would absolutely do it. You can just play the Nidoking, just play the Nidoqueen without its pre-evolutions, and put them down directly onto your bench with this attack. Now, the game mechanics probably don't allow you to really play or save a deck to make it viable without having its pre-evolution forms. I'm not actually sure. I'm pretty sure you can't do that, but obviously it would be probably somewhat of a simple change for them to do, the devs that is, in order to change that. But what was really cool about this is, again, you would play the 2 Tyranitar EX lines, and then you would play just the Nidokings and Nidoqueens. But because you have to put energy on this in order to make that happen, this would basically only ever be the only Pokemon that you have in your deck, which makes it super susceptible to being knocked out early and you just lose in the game. Now, the thing that makes up for this is once you do get it online, it heals all its damage. You're not doing any damage with this Pokemon either, by the way. It has 0 attack damage, so you're just getting the effect and you're healing itself. And then you tank. You get your 2 energy on it over the turns that you've been trying to evolve it. And then you get at least 2, if not 3 attacks off with it to get your maybe 1 Nidoqueen and 2 Nidokings, because your Nidoqueen's that big attacker that gets that ton of attack damage once you bring it in. And then you also have to put the energies on it, right? So this is why it's super tanky and why you heal all the damage from it. So basically you would heal all the damage, tank a ton of turns in a row if you can, and then bring out your fully loaded up Nidoqueen, and now it would be doing 180 damage to anything, because you may possibly also have your 2 Nidoking. Now, of course, you can still play the pre-evolutions just to kind of make up for the fact that you might get knocked out. But again, I wanted to make this as hard and balanced as possible, especially if you're going to be able to cheat out stage 2s, especially something like a Nidoqueen. If you get those Nidokings on the bench, have 180 to be able to sweep through all those decks might be really, really strong. This also requires 2 energy, so you have to put 2 energy on this, then 3, so that's a 5 energy turn. It takes a lot of build up anyways. But again, you might still be able to ramp into those stage 2 Pokemon a lot quicker. And because it has a 4 retreat cost, you would have 2 energy on it. You would still need to play something like a Leaf in this deck in order to get it out and hopefully not give your opponent 2 prize cards. Because once you do that, you give them 2 prize cards. Even if you bring in the Nidoqueen and knock them out, they may have a second Pokemon that they could bring in and just knock you out anyways. Or Sabrina a Nidoking in, which also has a very high retreat cost, and it might just be stuck there. So I do think this is balanced. In fact, it still might not even be that strong. I felt like I just wanted to make a dark type EX that could also help other dark type decks that aren't doing so good, and that still synergize with other things like let's say the the Weezin. You can also pair this with things like Weezin and Scolipede, right? Because Scolipede is a stage 2, and you can pair it with Weezin and Scolipede, because Weezin would poison. Scolipede can get that poison effect for its attack, and you wouldn't have to play all the pre-evolution forms for Scolipede because you're playing Tyranitar. And it would be another deck combined with Tyranitar EX and Weezin that completely denies prize cards from your opponent because of all the healing factor from your Tyranitar and all the Koga you can bounce back your Weezins and so deny them prize cards. Sorry, this is the end of the video. I'm screwing up like crazy. But anyways, that would be pretty cool. Plus, my next video is going to be non-EX Pokemon that I'm going to try and bring into the game from the Johto and other cards that evolve from Kanto Pokemon that we already have in the game. So it could potentially work with something like a Crobat who would evolve from Golbat, who evolves from Zubat, so it would be a stage 2. So we can also be possibly playing it with something like that. But again, this was all for fun. It's all theory. It's all a wish list. Let me know what y'all thought of my list, and if you think there's certain cards in here that are absolutely broken and just would either break the game in and of themselves or break certain decks that are already too strong. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. And also, join my other social medias. I have Instagram, I have Twitter, I have TikTok. TikTok, not so much. I'm still kind of working on that. But I also have a Discord. And in my Discord, what we're going to be doing is going forward, especially since Trade-In is coming out, we are going to have a bunch of channels in there on my Discord that allow people to go in, find trades, talk to deck discussions, find battles, get new friends, all that kind of stuff. So join the Discord. It's in my YouTube. The link is there. Check it out. And as always, keep cooking.